Welcome, Drink with James, episode 103. Quick funny story. 103 is the smallest weight class that you can wrestle. I was a wrestler in high school and I was tiny. When I was my freshman year of high school, I was 4'11" and I weighed 91 pounds. So I wrestled in 103, and my first match ever, I had been wrestling for a week and a half, and my opponent was a girl, and because girls are, because they don't have women's wrestling, they're, allowed to wrestle with us. So I've been wrestling for 2 weeks. She was also a lot bigger than me because I was like 13 pounds under the weight limit that you could be. So I was tiny, I was petrified. I went out there, wrestled her. Thank God I won. But because I grew up in the South, if I had lost that match, I think I probably would have had to just transfer, because they would have been the kids would have just been relentless. But then I implemented a rule. I ended up being captain of the team. I implemented a rule that you were not allowed to forfeit. You had to, if a girl was wrestling, you had to do it. And there were some amazing female wrestlers, and a couple of our guys got beaten pretty good. But whenever I think of 103, that's what I think of. I eventually grew into the 112-pound weight class, but it took me 2 years to do that. So wrestling story's over. I'm going to keep this decently brief. I am catching a flight tonight. I'm going to Nebraska. I'm meeting the girlfriend's parents. If I don't come back, I'm probably buried in a cornfield in Nebraska. What am I saying?
Have you ever been to Nebraska?
I've never been to Nebraska. I was just talking to Tim. I'm very surprised to see it's going to be 100 degrees all weekend. My suit it's throwing my looks all off. Am I bringing a suit? Yes. I probably shouldn't. I don't think there's any reason to wear a suit in Nebraska. No offense to Nebraska, but it seems like a pretty casual state. And I'm already kind of an asshole, and so sometimes I feel you roll up in the suit into a sports bar in Nebraska on a Saturday afternoon, and what are you trying to prove? But this is who I am. I am that asshole, and I am trying to prove something. So I'm bringing the suit, going down there. I'm gonna ride some horses, meet the fam. We'll see. Hopefully I'll be charming. You never know, day to day with me. If I'm totally honest, I don't really like corn very much, so I'm not sure what to expect from a culinary standpoint, because corn doesn't really excite me. Something else that Kristen is very passionate about is ranch dressing, and she says that the ranch dressing in Nebraska is different, and that New York has terrible ranch dressing. So apparently I'm going to be eating ranch. I think they just put ranch on everything. So I'm going to have a ranch-filled, corn-filled weekend of sweating in Nebraska, and I think I'll love every minute of it. Question number 1 is, I talk about fashion and lifestyle influencers, but I focus on beauty and skincare. Are there different rules for my feed? One, let me say, yes, I do focus on fashion lifestyle a lot, but 98% of the advice that I'm giving out, I think, goes across verticals. If you're a food influencer, travel, whatever, I do think there's some specifics in each vertical that make it different. Now, beauty, if you're a beauty and skincare influencer, I think one of the big differences is that there is not as much of a focus on the quality of content. Not to say that you have to put crap content out, but I don't think it has to be as editorial. I do think there's an opportunity there. So people like Mariana Hewitt or Chriselle, who focus on makeup and beauty and skincare, and are also really editorial and elevated, they are in hugely high demand, because a lot of these beauty brands, especially the luxury ones, they sometimes have trouble working with beauty influencers in an official capacity because they feel that the content isn't necessarily elevated enough for them and for their owned channels. And so Mariana gets a huge amount of business because she is able to maintain a level of editorial quality while speaking to beauty and beauty products and skincare. So it is something to consider, but I do think there are a little bit different rules. I think you can be more product focused. I think you can pull, you can talk more about product than you would somewhere else. I think that the feed doesn't have to be as editorial. On the other side, I think you have to have a bit more of a personality. I think you have to be able to speak to camera. I think you have to be able to know how to use video and stories. I think you should be incorporating video into your feed more than a normal style or lifestyle influencer would. So there's definitely different rules. They're always changing, but across the board, a lot of the fundamentals that we talk about are the same. Now, question number 2. Question number 2 is, how can I get ghost followers to engage again? Listen, if you can get ghosts to engage with you, I think there's a whole career out there for you. But seriously, how do you get ghost followers to engage with you? So people that stopped engaging with you, how do you get them to engage with you again? So I've been digging into some data recently, and it is shocking how many followers everybody is losing. The only way to gain followers, and I've talked about this before, is you have to gain so many more followers because you're losing followers every single day, whether you post or not. But what is interesting is that for the entirety of Instagram's existence, every time you post a photo, you lose followers, right? So you post a photo, you're gonna lose followers. People are gonna look at it and say, I don't remember following this person, I'm sick of this person, I don't want to follow them anymore, they annoy me, whatever it might be, you're losing followers when you post. That's going to happen. So what is interesting is that what's happening now is that it used to be that you posted maybe 30 photos a month, right? Maybe on the high end you posted 60 photos a month. Oh, now we have Insta stories, and people are posting 10 times a day to Insta stories. Okay, so now that's 300 times a month that you're posting, plus the 30 times a month you're posting on your feed. So now you're posting 330 times where you used to post 30 times. So that is what, 10 times the amount that you used to post? That is 10 times the amount of followers that you're gonna lose than 2 or 3 years ago before stories existed. And so you have to understand that, let me step back and say, so influencers have been emailing me saying, why am I losing followers? And my theory is that because we're posting so much more content, we are just losing so many more followers. And so if I think about what can you do to make sure that that delta stays positive, that you're gaining more followers than you're losing, it's probably less about trying to get people who haven't engaged with you for years to re-engage with you, because I think that's a pretty difficult task. But think about how can I keep the followers that I have? How can I make sure that I continue to keep them and keep them engaged? Make sure you're having a conversation with your audience. Make sure you're reaching out to them. Make sure you're getting feedback. You know, any brand that you interact with that's worth their salt, they're asking for feedback after that interaction. Ask your audiences, what do they want? What don't they want? What bothers them? What annoys them? If you have a newsletter, you could send out a type form. And send out a questionnaire about what they want to see, what they want to see less of, what annoys them, what they think they wish you did more of, whatever it might be. Get feedback from that audience, and then think about the journey, the first few weeks that somebody follows you. In that first few weeks where you get a follow, one, you have someone that is interested. They've obviously just clicked follow, so they've said, okay, I think this person is worth me essentially bringing into my life. But then in that first 2 weeks, they may not remember, they're not used to seeing your face or your content or your avatar or your name. And so they're more likely, I think, in those first few weeks to unfollow you because they're like, wait, what is this? Why did I follow this person? So think about your followers' journey the first few weeks. Maybe put an insight or maybe put a highlighted story on your profile that is just you introducing yourself. Talk about where you're from, what you do, so maybe put something there that says for new followers, and have them essentially treat it like the about page of your blog, a way to introduce yourself, a way to try and build a connection pretty quickly. Maybe in your stories every once in a while, ask your new followers to introduce themselves, to DM you, to say hi, say you want to learn about them. People want to feel like you care about them. They've already acknowledge that they care about you by following you. So they want to know you care about them. Do something to show that. When you get a new follower, jump into their feed, like a few photos, comment a couple times. It doesn't take that long. Now, if you're getting thousands a day, I guess it does. But try and do something to make sure that they stay with you past that first 2 weeks. And I would focus on that rather than trying to get people who haven't interacted in years, because chances are they probably just don't use the app. 30% of Instagram users don't log in anymore. So you can essentially take 30% of your following and throw it out the door because they're probably not even logging into the app. So there's nothing you can do to go get them back unless you show up at their door, ask them to open the app and start liking your photos. But that's not scalable and it's probably illegal. So I wouldn't do that. Question number 3, the last question is, can having a larger male following percentage than average for female or vice versa affect brand partnerships? So the question is, does the demographic makeup of your following in regards to gender affect the brand deals that you can get? 100%. We always are looking at the percentage of male versus female audience in an influencer. And it definitely will affect what you do. Let's say I'm a, what's a brand that just women would interact with? Let's say we've done stuff for Tampax before. Let's say we're doing a Tampax campaign. The first thing we're gonna do when doing a Tampax campaign is find influencers who have the highest percentage of female audience. Because any man that we show that messaging to is going to be wasted money. So we are going to look for those audiences that are, overwhelmingly female. If we're marketing something towards men, we're going to look for audiences that are overwhelmingly men. If we're looking for a balance, we're going to look for a balance. So we are always looking at demographic information, and I think that I've said it before, but as an influencer, you need to own your data and you need to learn the story that your data is telling. And so if you're 50-50 split, male and female, great. You need to figure out what the story is that makes that interesting. How are you going to talk to brands about that? If you're 95% men, how are you going to talk to brands about that? If you're 90% female, how are you going to talk to brands about that? You need to know these stats, you need to know them like the back of your hand, and you need to have an explanation for it and a reason why that is a great thing for the brand. You're 75% female, let's say, and you're talking to a women's brand. You can say, well, the brand would probably prefer you be 90%. So how are you going to kind of convince them that actually this is a good thing? That's up to you, kind of how you do that. But it's important to own your data and be able to tell a story with it. And this principle extends to all of your data. And let's just speak about demographic data. But I was talking to an influencer from Italy, and she lives half the time in Italy, half the time here. She's got kind of a 50-50 split of an Italian audience and a US audience. And, in one way that's really interesting because you're shooting some stuff in Italy that feels very chic and elevated, and the ability to take American brands, shoot them in Rome or something, and post about that and is great because people love to see places that they don't see that often. So, but from a data and demographic standpoint, it's a bit of a detractor because budgets are split up for brands very much along country lines. So there was a US budget, and the marketing person that controls the spend for the US doesn't want to spend money helping their Italian counterpart grow their business. And so, if your audience is skewed heavily or split across a lot of different countries, again, I think you can tell an interesting story about having a global audience and all of that, but understand that for some US specific brands, it's going to be less appealing for them. And I would encourage influencers, and I told this influencer who I mentioned who was kind of splits her time, I told her that I thought she should bring her pricing down when working with American brands, and as a way to kind of get a foot in the door and say, hey, I know that my audience is, only half of my audience is relevant to you, and because of that I'm going to lower my pricing because I really want to work with you, and I want to show you that even though part of my audience isn't in this country, it is valuable, and that I am somebody that you should be working with. So be honest with the way your demographics are split up. You don't have a huge amount of control over it, honestly. Like as it starts to grow, it will just kind of happen. I don't think you can say, okay, I'm going to really focus on like getting more men or more women to follow me. I think that's probably pretty difficult without straying from your actual voice and what you actually do. And so your data is your data. That's what it is, and that's probably what it's going to be. But again, make sure that whether it's gender or location or city or state or household income or language or whatever it is, make sure that you are able to speak to it and you're able to turn it into an advantage, because everything can be turned into an advantage. Unless you have 99% fake followers, it's probably hard to spin that into an advantageous story for a brand. But anything else you can spin into something interesting. And I say spin not as a negative thing of like spin some bullshit, but like it's up to you to understand. Basically, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying spin as something like you're a charlatan, you're like selling snake oil, but you should be the person that understands your audience the absolute most in the world. Nobody else should understand it as well as you. You should know it frontwards and backwards, and you should be able to tell a story of why the audience that you've spent 5 fucking years of your life building is interesting and valuable to brands, and why they care about you and listen to you. And if you can't tell that story, and if you can't use data to back that story up, you're not going to have a really long career here. Influencers don't talk enough about this stuff. They don't talk enough about their demographics and their data and the ROI and why you should work with them. And so even a simple understanding and being able to speak about it a little bit is going to set you apart from your colleagues and competitors. I encourage you all to like go into your insights page on Fohr, or go into the insights on your business account on Instagram and learn that stuff by heart and start talking about it in meetings it makes you sound smart. It makes you sound like you know what you're talking about. And if you're asking somebody for money, you need to be able to tell them, what does that money buy them? It buys them access to your audience. Who the hell is that audience? And why should they care? Those are the questions you need to answer before you can sell someone. I'm going to go to Nebraska.